Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, November 13th, 2015. For all you Trishka-decaphobics out there, happy Friday the 13th. And to be very honest, some of the best days I've had have been on Friday the 13th. So that old adage about, bad luck, bad luck. And, of course, most of you probably understand where that came from, because the original Friday the 13th was October 13th in the year 1307, and that was the day when the Templars were arrested en masse by French King Philip IV, otherwise known as Philip le Bel, Philip the Fair, because he looked really cute, and Pope Clement V. Now, the popular legend is that the king lusted for the Templars' great wealth, but it would be more accurate to say that King Philip wanted to erase the hopelessly unpayable debt the Templars' renting of money, a little linguistic device to get around the church's ban on usury, had plunged France and indeed most of Europe into. Now, fortunately for me, there were two countries that refused the Pope's orders, Scotland and Portugal, where one of my ancestors was a master of the temple. Now, the Portuguese Templars simply renamed themselves the Knights of Christ, and they focused their efforts on shipping and navigation. Now, the Templars already knew of the Americas. They learned of that from the Muslims, who had learned it from the Vikings that they were trading with. Now, Columbus's wife was from a Templar family, and it is thought that it is through her that Columbus learned of the New World and obtained his maps, while having to sell his costly expedition to the Crown with the promise of a faster trade route to China. Because nobody would believe there was another gigantic landmass out there. Or didn't you wonder why the sails of Columbus ships were decorated with the cross of the Knights Templar? A little bit of bad luck over in Indian Ocean actually. Piece of space junk fell to Earth earlier today. They knew where it was coming. They got it on camera. Still trying to figure out what it was. They think it was a bit of returning space debris, not a natural object, and could go all the way back to Apollo. I have another theory. During the Ranger mission to the moon, the first couple of those Rangers missed the target. They just missed the moon and kept right on going, and it's been known they've been sort of orbiting around the Earth-Moon system since then. And I hope they find fragments of this and confirm it. But that would be very interesting. After all these years, a piece of Ranger finally fell back to Earth. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab a phone call here. Tim in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I just wanted to say thank you for educating myself, and I'm sure a lot of people, on GMOs and the danger of them. And that guest that you had about a week ago was really good. The gentleman wanting to start a GMO-free restaurant.
Yes.
You had mentioned another company besides Monsanto, Syngenta.
Yes.
Are they about the same size as Monsanto? Do they do the same thing?
They're a little more focused solely on the genetic engineering. Monsanto it's a gigantic corporation, and they're involved in a lot of different areas of endeavor, of which GMO is only one. They're into manufacturing pesticides, material science, a lot of stuff.
Yeah, at my house, we've changed our diet quite a bit after listening to your show, and just wanted to say thank you for that. Like, we used to go to Starbucks all the time, but now come to find out there's soy milk and their regular milk, and you expect it from the McDonald's and those kind of restaurants, but it's all around you. They're pumping a lot of.
Oh yeah, they're conducting this horrible experiment on the entire human population. And, of course, anybody who gets sick from the chemicals or the altered DNA in the food, they're not going to admit that. They're going to say, oh, no, you're suffering syndrome, and we have a pill to sell you to make you feel better. It's like what they're doing to those poor parents whose babies are killed by the vaccines. Oh, no, it wasn't the vaccine. You murdered your own child with shaken baby syndrome, and you are going to jail. And again, when you're talking about the amounts of money that are at stake, yeah, these CEOs in the corporations and their lackeys in the government are perfectly willing to ship dozens of people off to prison to keep them silent to protect the profits.
Yeah, and the real scary one is the cotton that I guess they spray that all over the cotton, and then women use that in their
You know, but every time you hear about cervical cancer, oh no, they're out there selling the vaccine. You got to have your Gardasil shot. Got to give it to your daughter. Got to give it to your son. Really? I don't think he's going to get cervical cancer. It's just ridiculous. And now, of course, the World Health Organization has declared aging a disease, opening the door to a whole new raft of fountain of youth products. If you will buy and take this pill, you will stop aging.
Scary. But,
yes.
But thank you for educating everybody, and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those kind words. We're going to let you go here. Now, quick little reminder, the lovely Lady Claire will be sharing our microphones here in the third hour. Forgot to mention that right at the top of the show. I'm sure she'll forgive me. Getting on to the serious news. Russian forces have attacked almost 300 targets in Syria over the last 2 days. And if you heard on the news break, the U.S. is saying they're pretty sure they got one terrorist, Jihadi John. We're almost certain we got him, and that proves that we're making progress against the terrorist leadership. See, we got one. We actually got one. That's got to be some kind of progress. Against 300 targets by the Russians in 2 days, I'm sorry, I fail to be impressed, especially because we don't actually know for certain that they got the guy. And we've been told this or that horrible terrorist leader has been killed, and then 6 months later they pop up again. Now, an interesting article, this is coming out of srben.info, showing that Russian intelligence has intercepted radio traffic that the Islamic State has ordered the withdrawal of its forces from around Latakia. They're basically withdraw, take your valuables and your best weapons, withdraw deep into the territory. Not sure what they mean by the territory, but they're getting out of the city. Major, major victory. Now, we are getting reports that possibly in response to Israel's act of war against Syria, Vladimir Putin has deployed one of their high-end anti-aircraft missile systems to Syria called the Growler. And this is a very advanced system, very powerful radar, long-range missiles. It's able to hit aircraft flying as high as 90,000 feet at a range of 250 miles away, meaning that the next time Israel tries to commit an act of war against Syria, they're probably not going to get their U.S.-supplied warplanes back. Is that a problem for Israel? Oh, of course not. You'll be forced to buy them more as a replacement. You see, that's how it works. Now then, Moscow is attacking, or rather criticizing, Reuters for a report that came out a couple of days ago, and we commented on it. We took the story from Reuters about how Russia was preparing this 18-month transition plan with a new constitution and everything. Didn't actually call for Assad to step down, but it did say Assad was not going to be involved in the formation of a new Syrian constitution. It sounded really positive. Unfortunately, according to Russia, Reuters apparently was smoking opium or something. It doesn't exist. It's just more propaganda. You know, right now with the TPP, the corporate media is out there saying, we're going to charge everybody who links to our content. Well, I got to tell you, corporate media, the way you're going, nobody's going to want to bother linking to your content anymore. It's completely unreliable. Now, we're getting a report, this is coming out, actually it was a YouTube video, that at the same time the U.S. Navy was launching Trident missiles up the coast, the Pacific coast, where everybody would see it and go, ooh, ah, what is that? The Air Force flew B-52 nuclear-capable bombers near the Chinese man-made islands. Very obviously, the pairing of these, this is a message from the United States to Russia and China. We are willing to go nuclear on you if you do not do as we tell you. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And, boy, I got to tell you, I need a new egg timer. They're wearing out here. Russia's government has now come out denying the stories in the Western media that the Growler system is deployed on the ground in Syria. Apparently, it's another one of these fabrications. I'm concerned about the reason for it because of the Wikimedia, or WikiLeaks, in the area, saying that they had found communications indicating a plan to shoot down an American warplane and blame it on Russia. And obviously, if the Israeli planes got in and got out with their recent bombing attack, people are going to say, why didn't the Americans get by? Well, they've got the new super whiz-bang. Maybe. We don't know, except the fact that everybody is lying on this. Shouldn't be believing anybody, especially coming out of the U.S. government or the corporate media after that whopper about Saddam's nuclear weapons. We're getting a flash report here. Apparently there's been a shooting in central Paris at a restaurant, several casualties. Still waiting for more developments on that, whether it's an act of terror or the cook burned the bouillabaisse. I'm not sure. You know how the French are about their food. All right, let's grab ourselves a couple of phone calls. Andrew in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, I want to talk about Syria.
Okay.
An interesting, Deborah Lee James, Secretary of the United States Air Force, on Tuesday admitted that they're possibly going to occupy and govern the Syrians who have not fled yet, and also Ash Carter talked about intervening in Syria.
Well, of course, that's been the goal all along, to put a U.S.-friendly government in Damascus. And it's going to be another quagmire like Afghanistan, where we just have to keep troops on the ground, or Iraq, where we're sending troops back in again. We've had to go back into Yemen a second time, Libya a second time. This whole plan to conquer the resource-rich areas of the world, shackle them to the U.S. dollar, and use that to drag the whole world back to using the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking, it's in serious, serious trouble. It's falling apart.
I want to talk about, since the U.S. is possibly talking about sending troops to do extra combat, like increasing the number. I mean, there might be troops. It's like they're trying to show to Russia, like, oh, these are troops. They're trying to use them as human shields, not to target, like, the U.S.-hired mercenaries.
Well, that's one explanation. The other one, I think, is a little bit darker, and that is that the U.S. government is hoping some of these U.S. trainers will get killed in a Russian strike, and then they can say, well, now we've got to force Russia out. They're killing our people. I mean, again, look at history. Look how many people Franklin Roosevelt deliberately sent to their death to get his Pearl Harbor. It is nothing new for the U.S. government to gladly throw a couple of thousand military people to their deaths to make a political point. It's the way they think.
I think Russia would be careful not to target U.S. troops because it doesn't want to get in a war with the U.S. It's just going to let it collapse by.
Well, Russia at some point, has to draw a firm line, and if Russia were to kill one of our advisors in a strike, the first thing they're going to do is say, what are American advisors doing with ISIS and Al-Qaeda? And that's a question the United States can't answer. I mean, the United States is still in trouble trying to explain why we should go into Syria and Russia should leave when Russia is there at the request of the legitimate Syrian government. That's a big missing piece in trying to get the support of both the military and the American population on board with an invasion of Syria. We don't see a reason why this is necessary to do.
Last thing I want to talk about, like, did in Germany, like, this 87-year-old lady is supposed to be, like, who was a Holocaust denied, like, was being, like, persecuted for not believing, like, the Holocaust.
Yes.
And supposedly Israel just begging us to, like, the Holocaust, like, the memories, they're still part, like, even though it's 2015 and you were never a part of this, and Israel's, like, begging at us and, like, saying that we should support them.
Well, Israel's entire justification for having stolen Palestine was built on this idea that there was a deliberate program to exterminate the Jewish people in Germany. And that was a propaganda tool that was used to convince all of the nations of the earth at the end of World War II, after sacrificing blood and treasure to stop Germany from marching into Poland or France and just taking it for their use, to get the world to turn around and say, okay, what Hitler could not be allowed to do in Europe, we're going to have to allow the Zionists to do in Palestine, take this country for their own. And that's why Israel guards this myth so desperately, because if that myth collapses, then the whole world is going to say, wait a minute, we got scammed into committing a horrible crime against the Palestinians. We're just as bad as the Germans, taking their country for our own use or for the Zionist use without a good excuse. And that's why it's so protected. And it's like that graphic I put up on my main page this morning. If you claim to have seen Bigfoot, you don't go to jail. If you claim that a UFO took you for a ride, they don't ruin your career. If you think Michael Jackson or Elvis or John F. Kennedy are still alive someplace, the worst that's going to happen is people will chuckle at you. But if you question any aspect of the Orthodox account of World War II, you will go to jail, even though many of the claims have already been totally discredited, like the human skin lampshades and the soap made from people. Those have been discredited. Ground-penetrating radar shows there are no mass graves at Treblinka. Bit by bit, science has caught up with a lot of these claims. The Auschwitz Museum recently replaced the plaque in the front, lowering the number of deaths at Auschwitz from all causes, including typhus, by 2.5 million. But still that cherished 6 million remains unchanged. And yeah, and I grew up believing this whole story. But when I saw the absolute unremitting fury directed at anybody, just asking a question, that's when the alarms went off, and I said, wait a minute, there is some big secret being hidden here, where all the lawsuits and jail and everything will all overlap on this most protected point. There's something there. They're protecting.
All right, thanks, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and let's see. I'm going to try and fit in Daniel in Canada here before the commercial break. Daniel, what's on your mind?
Yeah, just on that same topic about Israel, reading about Jonathan Pollard this morning.
Yes.
How he's going to get taken care of by a party member for the rest of his life.
Yes.
I did have theory. I almost think that it's good that they're letting go of Jonathan Pollard, and instead of him dying in prison, which would get like page 14 of the New York Times, they're going to have a big party, a big parade in Tel Aviv.
Oh, they think he's a hero. They think he's a hero. They've named streets after him. I mean, he's a big hero. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Daniel. Okay. When we come back, I'm going to go over again the depth of Pollard's betrayal. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Let's welcome back to the show. And the caller before the commercial break was talking about Jonathan Pollard, who is now set to be released from prison and sent back to Israel, where he is going to be greeted as a returning hero. He'll get parades. He's got streets named after him. And the government of Israel has now said they're going to give him a pension and free medical care for the rest of his life. Except, of course, ultimately, you, the U.S. taxpayer, are going to pay for it. Now, the reason this is upsetting to a lot of people is because my parents' generation, the first generation after World War II, were forced to fork over roughly $5 trillion with a T, and that's back when $1 trillion was really a huge sum of money, to develop America's nuclear arsenal, with which we were going to maintain peace or dominion over the world. And then, of course, things ramped up a little bit during the Rosenberg case, where they gave Russia the secret to the nuclear bomb, and Russia had the bomb, and then we were off in mutually assured destruction and constant spending, building up the arsenals. Now, Pollard comes along, and he's an American citizen, but he believes in Israel, and he has access to all these documents about a lot of American secrets, including nuclear policy. And he stole them. They captured him on video, stealing the files in that little graphic I have about Hillary the spy. It shows him. And he sold them to Israel. And Israel turned around and traded these U.S. nuclear war secrets to the Soviet Union in exchange for increased immigration quotas. So at that point, the Soviet Union knew where our nuclear missiles were and where they were aimed. This was back before the days where they could retarget in the silo. When this was all going down, in order to retarget a missile, you had to go on out, open a hatch in the silo, open a hatch in the rocket, go on in there with tools and literally manually set the destination. Had the U.S. and the Soviet Union gone to war at that point, the United States would have lost. That is the scale of Pollard's betrayal. And when he was first arrested Israel said, we don't know him. It's an anti-Semitic plot. You're just trying to make Israel look bad. And then finally, of course, Israel had to admit, yeah, you got us. He was working for us. But really, you shouldn't charge him anything because you, the U.S. government, should have been giving us this information anyway. That was literally Israel's excuse in asking for Pollard to be released all this time. You know, the U.S. should have been giving us this information. Well, that's not Israel's choice to make, in theory. And based on what Israel did with these nuclear secrets, of course it made sense not to share this kind of information with them. But a lot of people are very upset over the fact that Pollard wasn't given the same sentence as the Rosenbergs. And a lot of people are very upset that he's being allowed to go back to Israel, where he's going to spend the rest of his life in the lap of luxury, treated as a celebrity and a hero. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call here. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Yeah, I was looking at this little piece about the flying fossil going past the islands, the artificial islands in the South China Sea. I mean, this is ridiculous. A B-52 in a 1950s machine.
Well, now let's be very careful here. Back during my NASA days, I got a chance to actually hang around some B-52s, and the original airframes, yes, date back to the 1950s, but they have been modernized, upgraded engines, upgraded avionics, and they're still very potent heavy carriers. So it is it's a real threat. There's no question about that.
Yeah, they are, but they're too slow. They fly too low, and I mean, yeah, the avionics, but that can be messed with.
Well, if you're doing a coordinated attack where you have succeeded in suppressing the target's air defense system, then the B-52s can stroll on in and drop whatever they want. I mean, look what happened in Iraq. They were carpet bombing the place with B-52s. Once the stealth fighters and the standoff munitions took out the air defense systems, the B-52s could just go wherever they want with impunity.
It was a flying target, and I'm sure the Chinese were painting it with air defense missile radar. So
I would imagine that would be something they would do to send a message that, yes, we know you're up there, and yes, you're very impressive, and, so forth and so on.
Well, I don't think they're very impressive. I think they're just flying fossils that need to be scrapped.
No, I disagree. Yes, the airframe is old, and it's old technology that's been upgraded, but like I said, I got to see them up close, and they're pretty impressive.
Well, they're rather large, yes.
No, that's not the reason. I mean, yes, it's old. The control surfaces are old, but they're not ready to be retired. There are every once in a while somebody will come up with an airframe that is built so well it just goes on forever. The DC-3 is still in regular use around the world. Yes, they put new engines on it and new avionics and upgrades, but the airframe is still good. Remember the Ford Motor Company? Decided they were going to get into the aircraft business. They built only one aircraft, the Ford Trimotor, but they built it so well, there's a whole bunch of them still flying around the world. I mean, every once in a while, you hit that magic button where you get a solid airframe, and the B-52 is one of them.
Well, one of my friends is still driving around in a Model T.
That would be fun. That would be fun. I got to do that once when I was working at an amusement park in Southern California, and I just thought that was the coolest thing. I said if I ever got rich, I was going to buy and restore one of those just to tool around the neighborhood in.
I'm looking at Syria again. There's been more breakthroughs in north of Aleppo and just east of Aleppo. They're just about taken full control of that huge chemical factory that I think was being used to produce the various, shall we say, banned weapons.
You mean by the, where the rebels, the hired mercenaries, were mixing together those precursors they were getting from Turkey?
Yep. Well, apparently the Syrian army now is surrounded the place and are slowly moving in. So
good for them. This has gone on long enough, and I think it's time for it to come to an end.
Absolutely. And it looks like the Russians will bring it to an end before Christmas.
Well, that's why the U.S. is desperate to have something happen where they're justified telling the American people, we must go in and get Russia out of Syria, and we've got to get Assad out of Syria. And so far, they're not getting any traction because we've been lied to so many times. We're just not going to believe anything. And my concern, obviously, as we head into the holiday season with both Thanksgiving and Christmas, the possibility of a false flag. You know, they're always going to fall back on that as a last resort to get the war going, and we have to be on guard for that.
Well, not only is it in Syria that the U.S. foreign policy is falling apart in Iraq, the Iraqis are making quite reasonable gains against ISIS and the other Takfiris. So they're looking at the moment to cut off one of the main highways between Mosul and Syria, so that'll stop the flow of equipment and arms and fighters going either way.
All right. Well, anything else?
No, Michael, thanks for having me again, and enjoy the weekend when you've got a day off.
Day off. I used to know what those were. All right. Well, listen, I got to let you go. We're coming up here on another commercial break, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And, gee, I hate being right all the time. I was talking just last segment about somebody needing a false flag to revive the war fever, and apparently the situation in Paris is being reported to have grown. Apparently 18 people were killed in the Paris restaurant. There are conflicting reports whether it was multiple gunmen or a single gunman. Now they're saying that there were shootings in other parts of Paris, an explosion, and a hostage situation at a Paris concert hall. This has all the earmarks of somebody's orchestrated false flag attack to try and revive the war fever. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that. All righty, let's see. We're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call here. Pat in Nevada, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I was watching on the computer Graham Cracker from South Carolina, and truly I was nauseous. We have the world's largest assortment of idiots in the Congress.
I'm not going to argue with you.
Songbird McCain, it's disgusting.
Yes.
It absolutely is disgusting. You know, they're going to try and do a draft and get all these young kids to sign up for suicide is really what it is. They'll forgive their student loans, and they'll feed them, and they'll ship them off, never to return. As Rumsfeld said, we didn't expect that many to come back after Iraq.
Yeah, and that's why they never funded the VA to deal with them. They just, if you're a loyal American, you'll die where you're shot. Stop being a burden on the system. Now, I was unaware that military recruiters were offering to retire student debt. And
I don't know that they are, but I figure that's something that they'll look to do
sooner or later, but it would certainly put this whole process of cutting all support for education to force these kids onto the loans, to make them debt slaves. And if you're our debt slave, you will go to war because of that. So I was not aware of that. You're right. It's something we may see in the very near future. I mean, the recruiters are offering out expedited citizenship to illegal immigrants who will sign up.
Oh, I don't care if they go.
Well, I do, because they're not going to be a dedicated fighting force. You know, they're just there for the green card. You know, they're going to, if they could get their compatriots killed by dropping the gun and running at a critical time.
Well, you know, the trick will be not to have any of them in your unit.
Well, the way they're pushing for them to be spread all over our society, that's going to be a real trick here. Wouldn't be politically correct. Anyway, listen, Pat, I'm going to let you go here. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to switch over here to Jim in New York. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike? I've been an avid internet user for many years now, very awake, but I'm just really getting tuned into your show, and I wanted to compliment you on a very great show that you run.
Thank you very much.
I'm calling because I'm on the South Fork of Long Island out here in the Hamptons, and recently Roger Waters from Pink Floyd had a show, concert actually, small concert in a small venue here. And it was very suppressed. You didn't hear anything about it. He had the concert, and evidently they were picketing because, you know, he supports
Palestine.
Not doing this with Israel.
Yes.
You know, boycotting and disinvestment. So they were calling him anti-Semite and all this. And then they actually said that they were going to refund people their tickets if they didn't agree with, you know, the way he feels about Palestine.
But my understanding is hardly anybody did. They just didn't care.
Yeah, but they're trying, like you said before.
Yeah, they're trying.
They are trying.
Israel's trying to prove that they really do rule the United States of America, either through our government or through direct action against anybody in the country that won't do as they're told to do by Almighty Israel. And I'm not one of those live on your knees kind of people, mostly because of how hard it is for me to get up off my knees at my age. Okay.
Yeah, neither am I, Mike. And he feels very strongly about that, as many people do.
And he has a right to do that under the First Amendment.
Of course.
And if it offends somebody, too bad. There's no law that says that you have a right to be protected from opinions you don't agree with. If you're going to have a First Amendment right to freedom of speech, there are going to be some people who don't like what you say. There's a lot of people who don't like what I say. Too bad. Ask me if I care. This is the world's smallest violin playing My Heart Bleeds for You.
Like Ron Paul said, we don't have the First Amendment to talk about, nice things. We have the First Amendment to talk about controversial things.
That's exactly right. The First Amendment is not about naked girls on brass poles or canvases in art galleries with bovine poo on them. It is to reserve the right to the people to criticize government with impunity, any government. No government is exempt in that First Amendment.
Very true. And I think they did a disservice to him, Roger
Of course. Everybody, Arthur Topham, Zundel, this 87-year-old lady throwing her in prison because she won't believe as she's told to believe. They're trying to send a message. We don't care if it's true or not. You will believe what we tell you to believe.
What about what they did to Helen Thomas?
Yes.
Unbelievable. Well, you know what? The best thing for us to do is to spread the word and educate people.
Well, that's what we're going to go on doing here. And Jim, thank you for the call. I need to let you go. We're going to try and fit in one more call before our top of the hour news break. Sean in North Carolina, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I wanted to talk a little bit about this human-caused climate change, global warming, whatever you want to call it, because it's really starting to anger me, actually. And, if people, I don't understand how they can believe Obama when, they're going to a meeting next month or over in Italy to discuss this, and he's going to try to prove it to the world that we need to do something in an emergency and everything. And, just by him doing that and his other actions shows what a liar he is, because when you talk about human cause, the key's in that. He's saying that the human population is causing this damage, but at the same time, he wants to bring how many millions of these refugees? Now, isn't it common sense by bringing more people in, if it is human cause, you're going to make the situation a lot worse?
There's a flaw with that. You're just moving the humans from one part of the earth to the other part of the earth, so it's not really going to have an effect other than the heat contribution, the energy cost of moving these people, so many people across so many miles of ground here. But the reality here is there's a certain arrogance in this whole human-caused global warming situation where, they're ignoring the fact that solar output fluctuates. They're ignoring the fact that CERN has already proved during periods of low solar activity you get more cloud formation from cosmic rays. They're ignoring all of that to try to claim that climate on Earth is totally under the control of human activity. They're actually putting out this idea that if the sun were to vanish tomorrow, that, the Earth is going to be just fine except for those icky poo humans, and you have to atone by paying your carbon tax. We've got the Royal Astronomical Society in Britain just issued a report confirming the sun is going into a new Maunder minimum. We're going to have a new little ice age, and still all of these global warming fanatics are out there screaming carbon, 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 carbon. And none of them talk about the pollution and the greenhouse gases being caused by all these wars. It's always your SUV, your plastic bag, all the things that you have to give up using to save planet Earth.
Well, as many times as they've changed the name to this, they need to come out and tell what it really is, which is government-caused legalized theft, this tax.
That's exactly what it is. I mean, the U.S. government is desperate for more money. Obamacare failed to generate the monstrous new tax windfall they thought it was going to because, you know, the American people still can't afford health insurance. And as a result, that's why they're back screaming. Okay.
Vladimir Putin's going there to argue against it. Again, another time that he's doing the right thing and setting the example.
Absolutely. We got to let you go here. We got to take a break for news and commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, and we're trying to stay on top of developments coming out of Paris, where there was a shooter at a restaurant, apparently at a concert hall. 15 people were killed there. There's apparently a hostage situation, reports of multiple explosions. This feels to be the false flag I was concerned about earlier in the show. And we're going to see some terror group pop up out of thin air and claim, we did it, come and get us, you schmucks. Because that's how these things get done. Lusitania, Pearl Harbor, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, on and on and on and on. It's an historic pattern. Now, yesterday I got into a debate with one of the callers over my policy of staying focused on the actions of the government of Israel and not allowing any generalizations out to all the world's Jewish people. And I was saying there's a lot of Jewish people in the world do not like what Israel is doing. They're constrained to silence by their religious beliefs that it is a sin to criticize a fellow Jew. And I learned about this during my first marriage to Broadzilla, who was attempting to educate me about the finer points of the Jewish faith, which didn't stick any more than my early upbringing as a Congregationalist. But supporting this idea that Israel does not, in fact, enjoy the support of the world's Jewish people, there's an article in The Guardian where somebody did a survey of British Jewish people and found 73% think what Israel is doing is harmful to the Jewish people. 73%. That is significant. Now, following Europe's example of yesterday, in which the European Union formally rejected recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the occupied territories, the U.S. has rejected Netanyahu's recent request that the United States officially recognize Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights. And this is a hot-button issue because now they've discovered there is a huge resource of oil underneath the Golan. And once Russia and Syria are done kicking out all these U.S.-sponsored terrorists in Syria, Syria's going to want the Golan back. They need that oil. And it is their oil. So, now Russia is saying that they may declare Ukraine in default if Kiev fails to pay off the debt owed to Russia for all the oil and gas they have been using. Now, Russia's been very, very patient for a very long time. And the final straw has been Kiev's statement that even if they had the money, they weren't going to pay it. You're our enemies, and, you know, if you shut off the gas, we'll scream that you're, committing a war crime and so forth. So Russia is going to declare Ukraine in default. And that will have repercussions through the financial sector. Now, we did not get our traditional Friday happy ending on the stock market, and it's continuing a trend. The market is headed down. The Dow has lost 600 points from its recent high. It's hovering close to going back into the 16,000s. WTI crude tumbles to $40, fastest plunge since December of 2014. Retail stocks are crashing at the fastest pace in over 4 years. We're seeing a lot of these large, iconic retail stores, like Macy's, are in trouble. Some of them are not even going to make it into that holiday shopping season. Now, General Motors, apparently unwilling to get their act together and actually manufacture a decent, safe car, is now going to import Buicks being manufactured in China to sell to us here in America. We've lost our manufacturing. There was a time when American-made cars, they were the envy of the world. That was the status symbol. Everybody wanted an American car. Now the United States is importing cars manufactured in China. And that's how you build a strong economy. You make products other countries want to buy. You grow agricultural produce other countries want to buy. And you trade across your borders more or less balanced. But the U.S. government and Wall Street, because they have these printing presses and the Bretton Woods Agreement, simply plundered manufactured goods and agricultural produce from other countries for the cost of ink and paper. And that's beginning to slow down. And we have allowed our manufacturing to decline seriously over the last 30 years, and nobody wants our GMO. And remember, that manufacturing might was a significant factor in the United States being on the winning side in big mistake number 1 and big mistake number 2. And I would hope that the war hawks in Washington, D.C. are going to realize that when we get into a full-on war with a military peer, we don't have the manufacturing volume to support it. Yes, we've got little factories that can make a few really cool weapons, but in a major war, material just evaporates. It's like pouring water on the ground. Now, we're seeing over here at CNN is reporting Americans are buying tons of gold. Americans understand what is about to happen. And still the price of gold is, being kept down. I think it eased up a little bit today. Let me look at my little, we now have a commodities ticker on the main page of whatreallyhappened.com in the lower right. And gold went up 90 cents today, so that's a positive. Sooner or later, supply and demand is going to have to take over. And all the suppression isn't going to work. Article coming out of Blacklisted News. If we do not change the way money is created and distributed, rising inequality will trigger social disorder. We're on the verge of that right now, and it all gets back to that 11th marble. And private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. The United States fought a revolution to break free of that kind of banker slavery, only to be sold back into that slavery by a corrupted president and a corrupted Congress. Okay. The Boehner-Obama budget deal could cost Social Security recipients up to $100,000 each in lost benefits. Another warning article coming on over here from Washington Examiner. Obamacare is imploding. Yes, it is. The exchanges are all falling like flies. But the Republicans are unprepared to deal with that. They don't really have a plan. It's a reminder that a lot of bad laws get perpetuated simply because someone's name is on them. Obamacare, the Brady Bill. We can't touch that law. We're, the president's name is on there, and we're trying to polish his image here. All right, we're going to grab a real quick phone call here from Mo in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for taking my call. I just, I don't know if you're aware of this breaking news here, where this kind of reminds me of this. Remember the Chechens that took that concert hall, or I guess it was a opera or something in Moscow. I think it was Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
And they, I guess it was an orchestra. Well, there's the same thing going on now, where north of Paris they've killed 15 people, and they're holding 60 hostages. And I didn't know if you were aware of that.
We're following it. We've got several stories already on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. The media keeps hitting the fact that these terrorists were using Kalashnikovs. Oh my goodness, they're Kalashnikovs. I can't imagine they're actually going to try and blame this on Russia, but they keep hitting that Kalashnikov over and over and over again. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to have to let you go and take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're staying on top of the situation over there in Paris, and there is now a link to anger the American people directly, because apparently this concert hall, where there is either 60 or 100 hostages being held, depending upon who's doing the reporting, the band that was performing there is from California. They were on their European tour, and so now that's all getting tangled up. I went over and looked at the Twitter feed, and it's already jammed up with all of these people are saying, oh, this has to be ISIS, and it's Putin's fault for going into Syria. Really, this is all, they're loading up Twitter to sell the idea of what's going on. And again, if you're as old as I am and you've studied as many false flags as I have, yeah, this is fitting the pattern. This is what's going on. Let's talk about our candidates. We are hearing that in the latest polls are showing that Hillary Clinton is polling poorly against most GOP candidates. And by most, they mean pretty much all of them. Another article came on out over an Investment Watch blog saying that Hillary is playing the gender game, and they're talking about the exchange going on between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, where Hillary dodged the actual point of the question and lectured Sanders for the patronizing, condescending tone, typical of males. So she's still trying to pander to the feminist agenda. Now, there is a picture that has gone viral over the net from a few years back of Hillary Clinton and a soldier in the war zone, and they're shaking hands. And what's controversial about the picture is the soldier's other hand, his fingers are crossed, which doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal until you realize that our soldiers are taught to use that gesture. If they're captured and forced to make a video saying that we are doing bad things, that if they cross their fingers, that's the signal, I am being coerced to say this. So the soldier was sending a signal that he was being coerced to shake Hillary Clinton's hand for the photo opportunity. Now, Ben Carson, you'd think this guy would realize that maybe it's time to shut his mouth. But Ben Carson was out there trying to distract everybody from all of his embarrassments over the last couple of weeks by screaming that he is absolutely certain China is fighting in Syria. Now, the White House is saying, no, there's no indication China's in Syria. And Ben Carson is saying, my intelligence sources are better than the White House. So he's out there pushing that. Now, if China is in Syria, the obvious question is, are they there at the request of the Syrian government, as is Russia, but not the United States? However, given all the other recent revelations about Carson's very thin grasp on reality, I'm going to have to go with the White House on this one. A little article came out here from ForwardProgressive.com. 10 of Dr. Ben Carson's most embarrassing quotes and ridiculous lies. Everybody's going back, and they're looking at everything he's ever said or written, and they're tearing it apart. And he should have understood, when you build a life that is based on a lot of self-aggrandizing fabrications and exaggerations, it's going to get torn apart. Now then, we are hearing reports that the GOP leadership is in a panic state right now, because Ben Carson is clearly self-destructing, Jeb Bush cannot get out of first gear, and Donald Trump is continuing to lead in the polls. And the GOP is so desperate to not let Donald Trump become the nominee. They're trying to draft Mitt Romney to come back in and throw his hat in the ring, on the principle that choosing a new president is simply too important to be left up to the American people. I mean, what do you think this is, a democracy? We will choose your leaders for you. from among ourselves, among our little clique, the ruling class. The rest of you just get used to that. Well, we dug out this video that was floating around from Mitt Romney's last run called When Mitt Romney Came to Town. And it's a very good documentary about how Mitt Romney treats the people who are caught up in his business dealings. And it absolutely shows why this man should absolutely not be allowed into the White House. Now, at this point, you will remember not too long ago, the GOP demanded Donald Trump sign a promise that Donald Trump would support the GOP's nominee. I think it's time for the GOP to return that favor and support Donald Trump, who is clearly the top choice among Republicans right now. And I think if you are a Republican, you should be very disgusted right now that once again, as we saw with Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012, the leadership of the GOP thinks that you, the rank-and-file Republicans, are all a bunch of morons and idiots who should not be allowed to choose your own candidates. They'll pick the candidates so that no matter who you vote for, the money junkies get what they want. And that's not the way the country was set up to be. By the way, if you get a check from Walmart in the mail telling you you have been selected to participate in a quality control program, throw it away, shred it. It is a scam. Because in the letter it says you have to activate the check by calling a number and providing banking information, at which point your bank account will be absolutely emptied out. 'Tis this Christmas scamming season. And of course the government's too busy killing Syrians to be bothered with crimes being committed against the American people because, hey, after all, these scammers are making money and they've got business fronts and they're paying taxes, and as long as they do that, nobody's going to do a thing about them. Alrighty, getting back to the Paris situation, they're now saying there were 3 separate locations involved in this terror attack. They're calling it a terror attack. The restaurant, the concert hall, and near the stadium. And this is all we're going to see on the news for the entire weekend. And it's a false flag. I'm going to tell you right now, there's no doubt in my mind this is a false flag to try and revive the war fever for the U.S. to go into Syria and kick out the Russians or some such. We'll see what the actual agenda is down the road. But this fits the classic pattern of another false flag terror attack, whether it's 9/11, attack on the USS Liberty, the Lavon affair. They keep doing this over and over again. On the next commercial break, I'm going to dig out that article about how many false flag attacks have been admitted to officially. Yeah, we did it. We scammed you good here. All right. When we come back, we're going to be talking about immigration. That situation is also wildly out of control. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're keeping an eye on what's going on over there in Paris. And, of course, this is all the corporate media is going to be talking about. Last segment, I mentioned that during a commercial break, I'd gone over to Twitter to look at what's going on, and it was loaded up with all of this stuff about, it's ISIS and so forth and so on. And we are now seeing the emergence of reports in the corporate media that ISIS was behind this terror attack based on chatter seen on ISIS-associated Twitter accounts. Now, you all know what a complete fraud that is. Anybody can set up a Twitter account claiming to be anybody at all. And we know that there's a big business in creating phony, multiple Twitter accounts with which to saturate the discussion. So this is it. This is the false flag to get everybody saying, we have to go after ISIS. International law and the United Nations be gosh darned. They really are bastards in government, aren't they? Alrighty, let's talk about immigration. That is blowing up in a lot of people's face right now. Article coming out of the Daily Mail. Are Europe's open borders on the brink of collapse? It's a rhetorical question. It's already happening. Countries are starting to put the border checks back up. It is starting to fall apart. And there's another article over in LiveLeak saying that it's gone past the point of no return. They're not going to be able to stop it and turn it around. Swedish police put up checkpoints yesterday. They're already starting to stop people and turn them away. at the borders. France just suspended the Schengen visa. They're closing their borders. Now, we posted an interesting video. The headline is, the Netherlands refugees complaining. And these refugees speak very good English. A lot of them actually look rather well off. They don't look like the poor, starving, struggling war refugees we thought. In fact, some of them openly talk about, I'm just going to go back and go home. Apparently, they have the resources to do that. But what was really interesting is how many of them kept saying over and over again, they promised us a better life. And they're complaining because the rooms where they're living don't have TV. That was actually a real complaint from the video. But they keep saying, they promised us a better life. Who? Who promised these refugees a better life to get them to go into Europe? Now, chief editor of the Norwegian publication Independent Barents Observer, Thomas Nilsson, is out there saying that Europe's refugee crisis is all Russia's fault. Russia orchestrated it as a form of attack on Europe. Russia's attacking using the refugees. They're grasping at straws for propaganda right now. They're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Now, over in Germany, they're starting to realize there's another aspect nobody's been talking about, the public health crisis. Now, we know here in the United States of America, these illegal immigrants being welcomed into the United States and shipped all over the country are bringing with them illnesses that have not even been seen in this country for a lot of years. Scabies, HIV, bubonic plague in one case. And they're seeing the same thing in Germany. There are all these illnesses being brought in that the German medical establishment hasn't had to deal with in decades. They isolated one guy on suspicions of Ebola. Now, they're saying that it was just a gastrointestinal illness and not to worry. But there's cause. These people are being allowed in without a medical check. Now, here in the United States of America, during the heyday of mass immigration, give us your tired, your poor, your teeming masses struggling to be free, they still had to go through Ellis Island and get a medical check. And those who were carrying illnesses were either put into quarantine or they were sent right back to where they came from. That simple wisdom has been abandoned, both in the borders of the European Union and the border with Mexico. Now, over at Sputnik News, they're reporting that Merkel has, for all intents and purposes, lost control over her government. Her own allies won't listen to her anymore. The scale of the refugee problem in Germany took everybody by surprise. Merkel apparently thought it was just going to be a few dozen. She was going to look good by setting the example of welcoming the refugees, not expecting it to be a tidal wave. Apparently, Angela Merkel went on TV to make a speech earlier today. There were actual speculation she was going to resign or at least reverse the migrant policy, and instead she stood firm and said, no, we're maintaining the policy and you're just going to have to go along with it. Now, over in Europe, at the Institute for Jewish Learning, there's this lady, Barbara Lerner Specter, was originally an American citizen, very pro-Israel, on a video is saying that this is an opportunity, with all the flooding in of Muslims to Europe, it's time for the destruction of Christian European ethnic societies. And this dovetails with that statement made by the rabbi not too long ago that, this Muslim migration into Europe was great for Israel. It was punishment to Europe for all the imagined crimes that supposedly were committed over the last several centuries. There is an agenda here to blur national identity all over the globe, except, of course, for Israel, which is refusing any refugees at all. They're building yet another wall with the border with Syria. They may be building it on the wrong side of the Golan Heights, given Israel's past behavior here. Okay, back to Paris here. They're now saying that the Paris explosions were suicide bombers, or at least that's what they're saying. Now let's get on to what's going on with our college campuses, where everybody is now convinced they're an oppressed minority, that racism is here, and they've got to riot to secure their rights. Over at Howard University, there was a racist threat calling for black people to be killed, saying it's not murder if they're black. That is obviously designed to be as incendiary as possible. It's propaganda. It's another hoax feeding this. Howard University's been forced to increase their security, reasonable precaution, even in the face of what appears to be a propaganda hoax. Someone is working really hard to trigger race riots in the United States of America. Now, this one was really good. Oh, this was actually in the Washington Post. Swastika at Bowie State as threats, resignations spread across American colleges. And I felt it necessary to include a picture of the swastika because it is badly botched. It's incorrect. It's drawn by somebody who doesn't really know what a swastika is. Somebody said, go paint a swastika on the wall. It's obvious propaganda. Now then, getting on back to Yale University, there was this character. The shrieking girl was caught on video berating a professor for not making Yale a safe space, and how she felt victimized and helpless. It turns out she, like the hunger striker, is from a relatively privileged background. Her family is wealthy. And apparently she has been trying to delete her online presence because people are saying, hey, you're not disadvantaged. Your family's got all this money. She's trying to delete everything off her Facebook post. In the video, she says, who the blank hired you to this professor? Turns out she played a role in his being hired in the first place. This is all stage-managed propaganda. Apparently, Yale was the scene of another firestorm of protest over a lecturer who presided over this question whether concerns about the offensiveness of Halloween costumes had gone too far. And he was surrounded by a gang and threatened with physical violence. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And President Obama is now getting his FaceTime on the corporate media, and he's laying it on with a trowel. You know, terror, it's an attack against all humanity and our values that we cherish, blah, 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 blah. France is our strongest ally, and we stand ready to provide whatever they need to deal with this. In other words, they're talking about we're now justified to go after ISIS even though Russia's in there already killing them. This is how they're going to try and reignite going into Syria. And yes, I'm convinced it's a false flag. Just like on 9/11. Looking at it, I said, this is a false flag. I was certain then, later proven right, I'm certain now. Because of the long history of this and other governments using manufactured false flag terror to get what they want. And I did post that article about all the false flags in history that have been officially admitted to after the fact. Yeah, we did it ourselves, blamed it on the other guy. We sure fooled you, didn't we? Got the war we wanted. Now, getting on back to this whole political correctness nonsense, which is erupting all over the college campuses. Everybody's out there saying, you know, my rights are violated if I have to listen to a conflicting idea. And apparently there was a big stink over this supposed safe space. That's the catchphrase. We need a safe space in which to be. And everybody was in there screaming all kinds of stuff. And you get the idea that what they mean by a safe space is, I can say what I want, but you can't. That's what makes it safe for me. So this Asian woman is in the safe space and saying, look, it's not just a white problem. Black people can also be racist. And they gang up on her and boo her and drive her away. That's what the safe space is. Our opinions are out there. You may not challenge them. If you use your First Amendment rights to counter what I'm saying under my First Amendment rights, you're creating a hostile space. That's how absurd this is getting. The problem is that more and more of these triggering incidents on all these campuses are turning out to be completely fake. The supposed accident with the pedestrian that led to the removal of the university president, turned out that didn't happen. The poo swastika didn't happen. These people out there screaming, I'm disadvantaged and it's all the fault of the white people, are turning out to come from very wealthy families. The whole thing is a manufactured hoax. And I want to make a point here. What you're seeing on all these college campuses is a perfect mirror of the destabilization tactics used by the United States to bring down other governments. And in a way, I think part of the agenda is they want to bring down the government as it is today in order to replace it with a true dictatorship in which there is no freedom of speech anymore. I'm looking at all these college kids out there, whining and crying and whimpering and want a safe space. What are you going to do when you get out into the real world? Where there's always going to be somebody competing with you, opposing you, with a different idea from you. What are you going to do then? Whine and cry until the entire world is a place where nobody can say anything? If it bothers anybody on the globe, the whole world will be locked in a permanent paralysis. Look, I have a piece of advice for you. If you're one of these sissies in the colleges and you don't want your feelings hurt, your best option right now, coming out of college, join a monastery or a convent. Those are the only places you're going to go in the real world where your feelings will not get hurt and you might not even be all that safe inside there when you look at all the sexual molestation problems afflicting the religious institutions. Now, we posted a video to the website. We bumped it to the top earlier today. I advise you to watch it. It's a guy named Stephen Hughes. He is a very popular comedian down in Australia. Probably the Australian version of George Carlin. And in this excerpt, he goes through about 3 topics. But the one in the middle is political correctness, and Steve Hughes absolutely nails it. I was trying to get permission to play it on my show. I couldn't. But you can go look at it on the video yourself. And he nails it. He's absolutely right. Oh, you're offended by what I say? Too bad. I don't care. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights guarantee us the right to say our honest opinion about what's going on. And you have an equal right to come back with a counter-argument. There's nothing in the Constitution saying that you have a right to never be upset or offended. And Steve Hughes puts it right in the video. When did sticks and stones stop being relevant? All these kids on these college campuses whining and crying, they're not very impressive as college students. They've got very thin skins. They take pride in how easy it is to emotionally upset them. And the U.S. thinks they're going to fight a war with these people? I don't think so. All righty, let's make sure I'm not ignoring a phone call. There we go. Apparently, the police over in Manassas have announced they're going to be setting up checkpoints along the road to just randomly stop and check people for things like expired licenses, not wearing the seatbelt, and basically collect money from them for the violations. The police are now plundering the American people, plain and simple. That's where we are. Now, over in Idaho, there was that tragedy with the rancher, Jack Yantis. Bull of his escaped, got hit by a vehicle, got a little annoyed. Yantis went out there trying to get his bull back. The police shot him. Then let the bull just bleed to death. It turns out these deputies had gone through active shooter training sessions funded by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. They're being trained to simply shoot first if anybody challenges their authority. That's what they're being trained to do. The state of Idaho is very concerned about web searches regarding the Yantis case and Jerry Spence. They're concerned. You shouldn't really be looking at that. most of the names of the deputies involved in this are being withheld for their own personal safety. You don't have a right to know when you have cops in your city who might just gun you down without a moment's hesitation. Now, getting on to everybody's second most hated government agency, the TSA. In all of their years of operation, they have never actually caught a terrorist. They did just get caught smuggling lots of cocaine. Earlier this week, 3 former TSA agents were indicted on charges of defrauding the government and smuggling cocaine at the San Francisco International Airport. Yeah, these guys are really going to be protecting us. Over at the White House, they've got a Secret Service agent, or presumably former Secret Service agent, 37-year-old Lee Robert Moore, has been arrested for trying to solicit a teenage girl for sex. This after being caught in a sexting scandal. And these are the people they've got protecting the President of the United States. That's got to be keeping Obama up late at night. All right. The U.S. Senate, having nothing better to do, just passed a bill to legalize mining of asteroids, which I didn't think was illegal to begin with because we don't actually have jurisdiction out there. And they were thoughtful enough to put in a provision banning the enslavement of any aliens found on those asteroids. Yeah. What are we getting in the U.S. government right now? I don't think we're going to have to worry about finding anything on those asteroids that could be enslaved. But it's now illegal under U.S. law. I guess aliens are now under the protection of the 14th Amendment here. All righty, we're coming up on our news break. When we come on back, we're going to be joined by the lovely Lady Claire for hour number 3. And yes, the corporate media is pounding Paris, 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 Paris. This is a false flag. I have no doubt whatsoever. We'll be back after the news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And for those of you on BAM User TV, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, who graces us with her presence on Fridays from time to talk about her unique point of view. How are you doing today?
I am very, very concerned about the events in Paris, and I agree with you 1,000% on what you're saying. And one thing our readers and listeners need to understand, tomorrow in Vienna there is supposed to be this huge confab of world leaders. Kerry's supposed to be there. Lavrov is supposed to be there in Vienna on Syria.
Yeah.
So the timing of this thing does not strike me as accidental whatsoever.
You know, that's an important point to make here, because having something like this happen on a Friday, it's the wrong part of the week, because everyone's going into the weekend. So there was a specific reason for the date, and not just because it's Friday the 13th. Mm-hmm. But Kerry is actually in Vienna right now trying to set up meetings with all of the various participants before the official meeting begins.
He's trying to pull Russia out of control of what Russia had been handling very, very nicely in terms of coming up with a peace plan and a solution for this thing in Syria.
Yeah, the U.S. is going to go into this Syria meeting saying, look what ISIS just did in France. You must allow us to go on in there and control the country. I have one problem. I have a lot of problems with that.
Yeah.
But remember, it wasn't all that long ago that declassified U.S. government documents proved the United States created ISIS as a tool to overthrow Syria's President Assad.
Right.
It was reported all over the place. We have Hillary's spokesperson on video acknowledging, yes, the U.S. government was funding and supplying ISIS. And they're saying, well, maybe it was a failed policy. Yeah, it was. But you know something? Let's look at that logic the gun grabbers have, that the providers of weapons to criminals should be liable for the crimes committed with the weapons. And under that gun grabber logic, which President Obama supports, the U.S. government bears the ultimate blame for what just happened in Paris.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And what is interesting is that there is supposed to be a meeting in Turkey with a large group of people, and it is said that Obama and Putin are going to meet on the sidelines to talk about the peace plan. I wonder how this is going to affect that. which is coming up next week.
Well, again, it was interesting on the news before the Paris story came along. The U.S. was out there saying, we got a terrorist. See, we're making progress. You should let us back in.
Yeah.
And, Putin is going to hold firm because Putin is smart enough to realize this is another false flag. And again, I would like to ask the Rivero's Rangers to grab that story off of my website about all the previous false flags that have been officially admitted to by the government that did them.
Yep.
And share it with everybody you know, your email list, your social media, and get it on out there. Because this is just another in the same pattern. Commit an atrocity, blame it on somebody, and launch the war. And it could very well be that ISIS was involved in Paris, but ISIS works for the United States of America.
Yes.
And we need to keep that message out there. Or otherwise, Obama is going to launch the draft and send your sons and daughters into Syria to be killed and crippled in this war over whose brand of ink and paper we're all going to use for the next 100 years.
And folks, don't forget, Charlie Rangel, senior member of the House Armed Services Committee a couple of years ago, reintroduced a draft bill, which has not, it's still sitting in committee. And this will not only draft your sons, it will draft your daughters as well. That thing is still there. It is in place, ready to vote on when the House Armed Services Committee believes the right psychological moment has been hit and the American people are not going to put up too much of a fuss.
Now, there's one other aspect we need to look at, okay? The open border immigrant policy. Remember, only a few days ago, a known terrorist was discovered coming in with the refugees carrying components to make bombs with. Wow, how's that open border policy working for you now, France? And actually, we're just getting word. France has now officially closed their borders. Period. End of discussion.
Oh, by the way, Germany has done that as well.
Yes.
Germany has closed its borders. The open borders thing, you are inviting problems, and as you said in an earlier segment of the show, you're inviting diseases to come in that haven't occurred, in these parts of the woods for a lot of time.
Absolutely.
And there is another story, and I don't know how relevant it is, but I'd like to share it. Apparently, U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter has removed his senior military assistant, Lieutenant General Ron Lewis, from his position yesterday over allegations of misconduct. Now, I have seen this guy's record, and I would be very, very surprised if these charges of misconduct actually hold up. But I have to wonder why he felt he had to dismiss this guy so quickly. What did this guy know? And how upset was he about it that he may have been willing to open his mouth and say something? But the timing yesterday strikes me very odd with all of this going on in Paris today and then the conference over the weekend in Vienna.
Yes. There's too many contradictory facts here. Yeah, this is a false flag. Staged, yes, possibly by ISIS on behalf of the United States of America to push the agenda going into the Vienna meeting tomorrow for the U.S. to be given back control over Syria. That's what this is all about.
Yeah, but Bashar al-Assad hasn't said, y'all come, which I remember from my late mother, who was very Southern, and we have not been invited to this dance. And yet we already have troops on the ground here in Syria, and it scares me, Mike, because it feels to me like it's just a matter of time before we are going to be in direct confrontation with Russia in there. And this is insane.
It is absolutely insane here.
Yeah.
And again, the U.S. government, they've launched this program to conquer all the resource-rich areas, drag the world back to Bretton Woods. It's gone on far longer than they expected. Our military resources are drawn down, stockpiles are drawn down. We don't have the manufacturing to replace it volume. And again, I want to go back to Sun Tzu and the art of war, or what von Clausewitz said, the triad. You will not have victory if you do not have the military and the general population fully on board with the need for the war. And the U.S. government does not have that. The military rank and file are burned out on all these wars of conquest. The American people are sick and tired of war, and they don't want any more. And if the U.S. persists in this war agenda, missing these two critical factors for victory, The U.S. government is going to lose this war. We even have top U.S. military experts warning the U.S. cannot win in a war with Russia, even if it goes nuclear.
Yeah, that's really, really kind of terrifying. And speaking of our vets and our people serving in the military, there is a really nasty statistic. According to the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, every day, 22 veterans take their own lives. You know, and it's higher, apparently, for veterans who were aged 18 to 29. In other words, the suicide rate among post-9/11 war veterans has absolutely skyrocketed.
Well, part of the problem may be that in order to keep the troops fighting and functional, even as they realize what they're doing is not moral and just, they're being doped up on prescription antidepressants. We had a veteran from Iraq on the show a year and a half ago who just said the medical doctors are just handing out these pills like they're M&Ms. The Pentagon is spending more on prescription antidepressants to keep the troops doped up than they do on the Black Hawk helicopters. And we know that these medications can trigger not only acts of violence, which are useful in a war against the enemy, but suicide. And that's just the way it is. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show and catching the updates here on the situation in Paris. Fox News just ran the banner headline, U.S. officials believe Paris attacks were coordinated, which is a wonderful statement of the very obvious to us all. What's very telling is where Fox News is saying U.S. officials. Why isn't it the French officials who are being quoted? They're there. They're on the ground. The army's in the streets right now. Okay? U.S. officials. Because they're already selling the idea that the United States is going to be in charge of the response to the Paris terror attacks. That's what they're doing out there. Now, over the commercial break, I took a peek at the Twitter feeds, and they are flooded with all these things. ISIS, Muslims, kill all the Muslims. But I noticed everybody coming on in and commenting about the open borders, refugee migrant, as possibly having contributed. They're jumped on. You know, how could you be so hateful? The refugees are fleeing, and it's got nothing to do with that. It's got everything to do with, ISIS. And if Putin hadn't gone into Russia, ISIS wouldn't be doing this in France. And you can already tell from the churning, there's a propaganda agenda at work. And again, look at the timing. Normally, you don't do something like this on a Friday night going into the weekend, because by Monday, for most people, it's going to be old news. They're not going to be thinking. It was done because tomorrow is the beginning of that meeting in Vienna over the future of Syria. And the U.S. is going to go on in there and say, you need to let us take care of Syria and ISIS. Even though the U.S. idea of taking care of ISIS continues to be the bombing of Syria's infrastructure, power stations, refineries, pipelines. And once ISIS is gone, Syria is going to have to rebuild all of that, and I'm sure the IMF is ready to loan them all kinds of money at a reasonable rate of interest to go in and rebuild it. I mean, this stinks to high heaven, and we could see rioting all across Europe as the Europeans who were barely tolerant of all these refugees coming in. This is going to get ugly. This is going to tear Europe apart.
Yeah, there have been speculations that, people are actually, countries, various of the Slavic countries, are literally building walls to keep these immigrants out. These huge concrete moats to prevent them from coming in.
Well, whatever the agenda was, for the New World Order to blur us all together, it is blown up in their faces. Capped off with this false flag in Paris, this is going to trigger a tremendous anti-immigrant, anti-refugee backlash. And I feel sorry for those people who got caught in the middle. But they made the choice to make that trip. And yes, as we documented in that videotape, they were being promised a better life by some as yet unidentified entity if they would make the trip from the war zones destroyed by the United States up to Europe. Somebody was luring them on with promises of houses and cars and all kinds of stuff. And we need to know who that was.
I agree with you absolutely. And it's interesting to me because people have been making speculations that this could be the beginning of the end of a united European Union.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Even more than the accumulating debt under that European Central Bank. This refugee stunt. Somebody over in the New World Order clubhouse didn't think this all the way through.
Isn't it George Soros who says that he wants to see borders completely eliminated?
Absolutely.
Didn't he make that observation? I would say Mr. Soros should be having kind of an oopsie moment right now, looking at what's going on.
He's going to find some underling to blame and say, you messed this up, you're fired and you're out of here.
Yeah.
We also had that gentleman over at the United Nations, the special rapporteur, what was his name, Kirkpatrick, I think.
Kirkpatrick, yes.
Was saying, borders are just imaginary lines, it's time for them to go away. Well, tell that to France and Germany, who just locked up their borders absolutely tight.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, next story.
I would like to go to kind of a very sad report that's been done. Apparently, when our vets are returning, study is finding more child abuse in homes of our returning vets. And apparently, they are at heightened risk of abuse in the 6 months after their parents return, a risk that increases among soldiers who deploy more frequently, according to a study that was going to be released today. And it will be published in the American Journal of Public Health. The abuse of soldiers' children exposes another hidden cost of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and wherever else we don't name, but we've got troops. And it was research done by the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, looking at families of more than 112,000 soldiers whose kids were 2 years old or younger for the period of 2001 to 2007, which was the peak of the Iraq War. And researchers examined Pentagon-substantiated instances of abuse by a soldier or another caregiver, and from the diagnoses of medical personnel within the military's healthcare system. And these results are awful, but, they don't surprise me, because I am sure that when people have been in country for a while, and they realize that what they are doing is not about America's freedom, it's not about preserving the American way of life, but it's about preserving and enhancing private corporate wealth. When they get to that Buddha on the road moment, that realization, that has got to be just mind-blowing for them.
Well, the other aspect of it is a little more fundamental. The longer you are in a combat zone, the more you tend to see the entire world as a combat zone.
Yeah.
And you respond to any crisis in life, including a crying child, the way you would a disturbance in that combat zone. And this child abuse problem, of course, is coming on top of another little mentioned cost of the Iraq War, which is that our serving troops do get exposed to depleted uranium munitions, and as a result, the offspring of these soldiers who served in Afghanistan and Iraq and all these other U.S. war zones, when they come on back, the incidence of severe birth abnormalities in the children they have is considerably higher than the average for the non-military population.
It's a tragedy.
It's a tragedy. It's the punishing of innocence for the crimes of the parents, and it's something else that the U.S. government doesn't mention publicly, and certainly the military recruiters aren't going to tell these young people they're recruiting that, hey, if you come and fight the war first and by some miracle you're not killed or crippled, you're probably going to have a child with two heads.
Yeah, the same as happened in Fallujah in Iraq when they were dropping all that depleted uranium weapons on them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The people who are still living in those areas, horrible problem with birth defects and from all this depleted uranium munitions. All righty, we're coming up here on another commercial break, and apparently there is a report now that in the concert hall where the American band was playing, the hostages are being executed one by one. So they're building up to something really dramatic. How very wonderful for Geraldo Rivera that his daughter was in the concert but managed to get out and not be one of the hostages.
Oh, really?
Yes, really.
Oh.
We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show, and catching up on the situation in France. They've declared a state of emergency. Obviously, they're now saying that there are 6 locations subject to these terror attacks. Apparently, the French police are mounting an assault on the concert hall based on the report that the hostages inside are being executed one by one rather than held for some negotiation. They're reporting that some of these terrorists had pump shotguns and were just shooting people left and right very calmly. which should remind us all that France does have very strict gun laws. You're not allowed to have a gun to defend yourself when the crazies and the terrorists and the hired terror actors show up.
Yeah.
Everybody's saying, why France? Why France? Because the people can't shoot back.
Yeah,
Right.
I hear you. There was a very interesting statement made by retired General John Allen today in CNN. He is the recently replaced U.S. Special Envoy to the war against ISIS and offered an extremely pessimistic assessment of the war, saying that the U.S. needs to address the causes of symptoms like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and failing that, we will be condemned to fight forever. But, Mike, historically, the U.S. hasn't been particularly great at even identifying the causes of insurgencies against U.S.-backed governments, let alone making any credible efforts to address those problems. And apparently General Allen didn't really make a real effort to identify the causes. He thought the U.S. needed to address either. Well, General Allen, I have a suggestion. The problem is that no one in U.S. civilian, government, or military wants to address the problem of U.S. military interventionism itself, coupled with setting up tin-pot dictators who are completely unresponsive to the needs of those who govern. It's that simple.
Well, because up until recently, the American people, and in fact the people of the world, didn't understand this is what the U.S. government has been doing since the end of World War II.
Yeah.
We were always told it was a popular uprising, it was the people were revolting against, a cruel tyrant dictator, on and on and on. Now we understand the game that has been played of the U.S. going into a country, stirring up trouble, overthrowing the government, replacing them with a dictator.
Mm-hmm.
And the U.S. government admits it now. The U.S. government has admitted that in 1953, they went into Iran, stirred up unrest among the population to overthrow the democratically elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh and impose the dictator, the Shah, along with his Savak secret police who tortured anybody who disagreed. And the Shah expressed his gratitude by selling Iran's oil to American and British oil companies at below market prices,
right,
which meant he didn't really have a lot of money to take care of the Iranian people, even if he'd had the disposition to do so.
Yeah.
And in 1979, the Iranian people kicked him out, and the U.S. government has been making stink face at the Iranians ever since.
Yeah, and it's this repeated pattern that gets me, and, I've said this before on the show, I am a Christian pacifist. I think at 66 that there are far better ways to resolve geopolitical differences than war. It makes me so angry, and I wish more of the American people would wake up and see this repeating pattern. Because it's this repeating pattern of going in, overthrowing, getting a tin-pot dictator there who the people ultimately don't like and kick out, that is a real fundamental flaw in our foreign policy thinking, if one can call that thinking.
Well, our foreign policy has been, magical, wishful thinking all along here. And I want to make a point here, because a lot of things that I wrote about when I first started my website, my blog, 20 years ago, were ridiculed at the time, have since been proven to have been accurate. And I'm not saying that to toot my own horn or tell you what a great guy I am. I'm saying it to make a point. That when I tell you that the U.S. is going to lose this war, that they're dragging us into, that you probably ought to be paying attention. Okay, now we have a phone call here. We're going to talk to Nosium in the Netherlands. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, hello. I just want to call in about there has been a shooting in Paris.
Yes, we know.
I don't know if you have heard about it yet.
Yeah, we've been spending a great deal of time on it. Yeah. It's a terror attack. I'm convinced it's another false flag. One day before the Vienna meeting on Syria, to try and put control of Syria back in the hands of the U.S. government.
Yes. And, what the funny part about it is, it happens on Friday the 13th.
Well, I don't think that was necessarily chosen as much as proximity to change the atmosphere at the Vienna meeting. Because ever since Russia came in and started being very effective against ISIS, the U.S. has been trying to regain the initiative, and I'm sure that Kerry is already in there saying, see, Paris proves that Russia has made things worse, and you should all tell Russia to get out and let the U.S. back in charge of Syria and getting rid of Assad, and, we'll guarantee that the terror attacks will stop. But if you remember, Adolf Hitler played that same trick with the brown shirts. Adolf Hitler got his enabling acts because of all the terrorism that was going on in Germany, and he said, if you will give me the enabling attacks, the terror will stop. And the German people the German legislature voted in the enabling act, and the terror stopped because the terrorists had been working for Adolf Hitler. And then, of course, he turned around and he got rid of them all during the Night of the Long Knives so that they wouldn't rat him out.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
And what I want to notice, so that the notice is confirmed, I'm watching Dutch television here, and not Dutch television, but Dutch media. And the first thing they said was they had they assume, this is a nice word, assume that they had Kalashnikovs. So
yeah, that's being reported all over the place as well. They're going to try and taint Russia with
knows
that.
exactly what's happening.
Well, see, the reports we're getting now is that they had pumped shotguns, and I don't know that Kalashnikov makes a pumped shotgun, but they're trying to tarnish everybody with this. Twitter's all out there. This is Putin's fault for going into Syria in the first place. And anybody who says that the open borders in Europe may have allowed these people in very easily, oh, no, you're being hateful, you're being politically incorrect. This has got nothing to do with the refugees and the immigrants. This is all ISIS. But again, declassified U.S. documents confirm ISIS was created for and works for the United States. And, we just got to keep getting that information out there.
Exactly true. And to be very quick, I just saw some media footage, so with camera pictures live from Paris. Mm-hmm. When I see those agents and those police people and what is coming in, when they say, okay, this is a victim. When I see this, there is no way, when you are in an hostility, you must be prepared. They are like walking left and right, and maybe you can see that in the future. But I saw that those videos.
I saw that as well, but we don't know the proximity of those people in the camera to the actual scenes where these things are going on down. But let's see, 40 dead, 60 wounded so far. And this may still be continuing. There may be a big bang to finish it off somewhere down the road. Maybe blow up the Eiffel Tower. No, I'm not laughing. I mean, this is all or nothing. They're either going to get their war with this, or it's just going to be another failed piece of propaganda.
And I'd like to ask another question. In the media reports that you are seeing, does it appear that the French army has been called into Paris for this situation?
No. Absolutely not. What I saw was policemen.
Yes, okay.
We got a report here that the French army was mobilizing to patrol the streets of Paris.
Very odd that the army has not been called in.
No, I saw in those pictures, I saw no army. I saw only policemen who are just walking around like, with a...
Okay, Nosium, thank you very much for the information. Okay. I'm going to have to hang up. We've got to take a commercial break. We'll be right back after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our program. Last segment on our Pauhana Friday program. And before I turn this back over to Claire, latest word coming in from Paris. There's an assault underway at the concert hall, which means probably nobody's going to come out of there alive, including the shooters, because nobody wants them to be talking about just who it was who put them up to this whole situation. And I got an email from a listener who's watching the reporting over on the NBC Nightly News, and they interviewed an intelligence expert who said that this is happening because they allow encryption on the Internet. So that right there tells you this is just a non-stop propaganda fest to sell all of these policies. Everything the government wants. They're going to link onto this thing. We can't have encryption on the Internet. Well, all you can do, it's like guns. You can take away guns and encryption from law-abiding citizens. The criminals are going to have it, especially criminals working for the U.S. government who've probably got frequency agile transceivers and don't even use the Internet. But that's the spin. The talking point coming out of NBC is this is a good reason to deny encryption to the American people. It's pathetic. It's tragic and it's pathetic.
Yeah.
All right. What did you want to say?
Well, I wanted to say at the end of all this, even though the threat might have been politically motivated, Virginia Tech did something to pull together their students and their faculty that I thought was really wonderful, even if this may not have been a real threat. Virginia Tech joined together to stand and protect their Muslim students after a threat to kill them was found scrawled on a bathroom wall last week. And what they did, the school president, Tim Sands, made a statement on Twitter, and he said, today's threat may prove to be a cruel prank, but it is an opportunity to stand with our Muslim friends and colleagues. #StrongTogether. And the entire campus came together in protection and support of their Muslim community on campus. And however this came down, I think it was a beautiful expression of American diversity and how it can work when people are working together. So Virginia Tech, you have my applause on that.
All right. I'm getting a lot of emails coming on in from various listeners around the world. We've got email from Adelaide. The local news services and Russia Today are confirming the French army is being deployed to the streets of Paris.
Yeah.
Obviously, it takes a time for them to assemble
and to stage,
and to stage and then deploy. But yes, the army is on the streets here.
Yeah.
And this is a spectacular production. There's no two ways about that. Let's see. Apparently, Russia Today is interviewing Anna Fedorova, a Ukrainian pianist. And concern is that they're going to try and find some way to say this is all Putin's fault. Because if he had left Syria under American control, ISIS wouldn't have gone to France. I mean, that's what this is. This is a propaganda exercise.
And I'd like all of our readers and listeners to be very sensitive to what goes on at that meeting in Vienna tomorrow and probably into Sunday, because if the United States does not get what it wants in terms of more control of the Syrian situation, I would suggest, we're a couple of weeks away from one of the most iconically American celebrations, which is Thanksgiving, and I would worry that there might be something happening in and or around the Thanksgiving time frame.
Or possibly Christmas.
Yeah.
I mean, this is how these things get done. Now, we're going to end the show. I've got this article up on all these false flag attacks, 42 of them that are in this article, in which officials in the government that played the false flag admit to it. Okay? Let's see. And we all know about the Gleiwitz incident that Hitler used to justify and get his people to invade Poland. Let's see. 1931. Japanese troops set off a small explosion on a train track in 1931 and falsely blamed it on China in order to start the invasion of Manchuria. A major with the Nazi SS admitted at the Nuremberg trials that under orders from the chief of the Gestapo, he and other Nazi operatives faked attacks on their own people and resources which they blamed on the Poles to justify the invasion of Poland. This is obviously a reference to Gleiwitz. Nazi General Franz Halder testified at the Nuremberg trials that Nazi leader Hermann Goering admitted setting fire to the Reichstag and blaming it on the communists. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev admitted in writing that the Soviet Union's Red Army shelled the Russian village of Maynila in 1939, framed Finland for it as a basis for launching the Winter War against Finland. Russian President Boris Yeltsin agreed, yes, they had been the aggressor behind this false flag. The Russian Parliament, current Russian President Putin, and former Soviet leader Gorbachev all admit Joseph Stalin ordered his secret police to execute 22,000 Polish army officers and blame it on the Nazis. The British government admits that between 1946 and 1948, it bombed 5 ships carrying Jews attempting to flee the Holocaust to seek safety in Palestine, set up a fake group called the Defenders of Arab Palestine, then had the pseudo-group falsely claim responsibility for the bombings. So every time site intelligence comes up with a new terrorist website, it's a manufactured group. That's what they did. Britain bombed these ships full of Jews and set up a fake group to take responsibility for it, to put the blame on Palestine. Israel admits that in 1954, Israeli agents carried out the bombings called the Lavon Affair and planted evidence to frame the Arabs as the culprits. The CIA openly admits that it hired Iranians in the 1950s to pose as communists and stage bombings as a prelude to the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh. They're admitting they did all this stuff. The Turkish Prime Minister admitted that the Turkish government carried out the 1955 bombing on a Turkish consulate in Greece to blame it on Greece for the purpose of inciting and justifying anti-Greek violence. The British Prime Minister admitted to his Defense Secretary that he and American President Dwight Eisenhower approved a plan in 1957 to carry out attacks in Syria and blame it on the Syrian government as a way to bring about regime change. What they're doing today is nothing new. Been trying to do it since 1957. The former Italian Prime Minister, an Italian judge, and the former head of Italian counterintelligence admit that NATO, with the help of the Pentagon and the CIA, carried out terror bombings in Italy and other European countries in the 1950s and blamed the communists in order to rally people's support for their governments in Europe in the fight against communism. One participant in this false flag said you had to attack civilians, people, women and children, innocent people, unknown people. The reason was simple: to force the population, the Italian public, to turn to the state to ask for greater security and in exchange surrender their rights and freedoms. In 1960, American Senator George Smathers suggested that the U.S. launch a false flag attack on Guantanamo Bay to give the United States the excuse to actually go in and overthrow Castro. This was the beginnings of what became the Bay of Pigs, I think. Official State Department documents show that in 1961, the head of the Joint Chiefs and other high-level officials discussed blowing up the consulate in the Dominican Republic in order to justify the invasion of that country. The plans were called off, but it was a serious plan. As admitted by the United States government, recently declassified documents show that in 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff signed off on a plan to blow up American airplanes and commit terrorist acts on American soil and blame it on the Cubans to justify another invasion of Cuba.
Folks, this is all real.
Yeah, this is admitted to. This is not even denied by the government.
Yeah.
In 1963, the U.S. Department of Defense wrote a paper promoting attacks on nations within the Organization of American States and blaming it on Cuba. The U.S. Department of Defense even suggested covertly paying a person in the Castro government to attack the United States to justify a retaliation. This is how the government gets their wars. And what's happening in Paris today is just more of the same. Please share that with everybody that you know. This is a push on whether or not we're going to have World War III for real by the end of the year. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.